Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to my first video of 2025. For those who are new, I like to make these little videos about films and occasionally shows that I enjoy and want to share. I typically kind of steer away from spending any time trashing a film or show that I didn't enjoy, because if I didn't enjoy it, maybe it just wasn't for me. I'm not the target audience. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood, and no matter what, why would I want to spend any time making a video about that? Though occasionally I may cover a film that I didn't enjoy if it's part of like a franchise, a review that I'm doing, or a boxed set perhaps, but even then, try to find a little bit of a silver lining in there, something positive, or at least not go too hard on it. Anyways, jumping into 2025, I wanted to do another video similar to my Poor Things vs. Frankenhooker video from around this time last year, and I will link to that at the end, so stick around, where I made some direct comparisons from one film to the other in some ways. For that Poor Things vs. Frankenhooker, it was mainly focusing on if they were the same film, because there were lots of memes and comments about Frankenhooker just being remade as Poor Things. It's not true, but anyways, it's an interesting idea for video. So for this one, I wanted to do a video for the 2024 version of Nosferatu versus the 1992 version of Dracula. Yeah, the one with Keanu struggling a little bit with that British accent, and because I kind of like Dracula a little bit more than Nosferatu. I'm not trying to be like some poser going against all the superb talk about Nosferatu as if I'm somehow elevated above it. I simply like Dracula a little bit better, even though I still love Nosferatu quite a bit. But that seemed to be an unpopular opinion, given all the praise going around for Nosferatu. Anyways, in this video, I just wanted to go into what I like about both of these films, despite whatever few flaws that they have, and why Dracula ultimately just kind of nudged out Nosferatu and that I enjoyed it more. So these stories, of course, have been around for over a century and have been interpreted in many ways, so I'm not too worried about any spoilers on this. And before we dive in, as a little reminder on the history here, both Nosferatu and Dracula are based on the 1897 novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. In the case of Nosferatu, it was like an unauthorized interpretation of Dracula brought to the screen by German filmmaker F.W. Murnau. Some locations, names, details were heavily changed from Dracula, but even with those changes, there were some lawsuits. All copies were ordered destroyed, but luckily not all were. Some were saved, restored, and have been cleaned up over the years, and Nosferatu itself has fallen into public domain as of 2019, so that kind of helps open things up to do a remake of this original Nosferatu film. So, Dracula, of course, has been filmed several interpretations and spin-offs over the last 100 years. And just the Hammer films alone, we have several of them. I covered many of them on the channel, so you can check out the back catalog for those. And usually the Dracula interpretations try to stick a little bit closer to the book. But, you know, there are a lot of cases where they've done some sort of an update, such as ones like Dracula 2000 or anything trying to bring it into the modern day. So while the 1992 Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola is based off the original book, the 2024 Nosferatu, from what I understood going in, is based specifically off the original Nosferatu film from 1922. It's just a remake of it. So now with all that out of the way, let's start off here with Nosferatu. So this was released on Christmas Day, 2024. Stars the likes of Nicholas Hoult, Lily Rose Depp, Willem Dafoe, Aaron Taylor Johnson, and Bill Skarsgård as the Count. It is directed by, and the screenplay for this interpretation is written in part by Robert Eggers, who gained a lot of fame with The Witch, The Lighthouse, and The Northman. So you'll see a lot of familiar faces of actors that he's worked with previously in this film. Now, I'm not going to go into too much about the differences in the story between Nosferatu and Dracula, as it's isn't really about those differences. It's really just about why I kind of prefer Dracula. So for this specific, the synopsis for this specific interpretation of Nosferatu states, a gothic tale of obsession between a haunted young woman and the terrifying vampire infatuated with her, causing untold horror in its wake. Now, if you are familiar with the overall story of Dracula, you'll see a lot of that reflected in Nosferatu, and much of it stuck out as I was watching this, as I remembered the original Nosferatu a bit, and I'd also remembered a lot about the original Dracula film, the Hammer films, and that 1992 Coppola version, as well as having read the original book. I was recognizing many characters and locations as far as just these little changes here and there, but even with kind of knowing the overall storyline, it didn't really bore me or take me out of it at all. I was able to just hop right in and be ready to see what they were going to do with this interpretation of Nosferatu. So first off, when they say gothic tale, they mean it. This is dark, It's cold, it's bleak, it's creepy, while also somehow working in a very sensual psychic connection between Ellen, portrayed by Lily Rose Depp, and our Count. As we work through this story, this connection kind of deepens between them. This affliction of hers coming to light as basically being infected by Nosferatu, and this plan that to vanquish him comes to light. During all of that, this film is absolutely gorgeously shot and lit. While most of the time the color palette is so muted, it is borderline black and white, it works really well for the tone of this film specifically, because at its root, this is a tragedy. It's a cold, slow downer, similar to the book in that way, as I recall reading this way back, which has both Frankenstein and Dracula within it. And actually, at the time that I read it, kind of enjoying Frankenstein a little bit more by comparison, because I just kind of like the tone a little bit more. And just like how deep they went with some of the characters in Frankenstein. But at any rate, the film is very similar to reproducing that overall feel of the book, and it takes us further than the original Nosferatu film did, or further than it was able to at the time. I actually think remaking Nosferatu versus just doing another remake of Dracula was a nice change, as overall Nosferatu has always felt like a bit darker of the two films, in my opinion. But that is also the reason why I lean towards Dracula 1992 as my favorite out of these two. But before going into Dracula, I just want to reiterate, I really did love Nosferatu. I thought it was great. Performances are great. Story was really well fleshed out, a lot more than the original was able to do with what they could with filmmaking at the time. The soundtrack is great. The pacing, it was dark and disturbing at times and very depressing. And the way it was shot wraps it all up and kind of makes good on that phrase, gothic tale. It's truly a great film that's more than worth checking out. But it's a little bit different. It's a little bit cold and dark. If you're in the mood for that, you're really going to love it. But Dracula 1992. So, this is the one that stars Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, Anthony Hopkins, Cary Elwes, Richard E. Grant, and of course Gary Oldman as the Count. Now, this one is based more directly on the Bram Stoker novel. This one is directed by Francis Ford Coppola, who brought us such films as Apocalypse Now and The Godfather, Captain EO. Well, at least he's versatile, I guess. But he'd basically proven that he can produce a very stunning film, or ride at Epcot. Now, the synopsis for this interpretation of Dracula is a bit closer to the book and may sound familiar, and it is as follows. The centuries-old vampire Count Dracula comes to England to seduce his barrister Jonathan Harker's fiancée Mina Murray and inflict havoc in the foreign land. Now, we have a lot of similarities between these two films, and a lot of similarities between the 1992 version of Dracula and other interpretations, but at the core, it's pretty much the same. Count is moving to town, where our leads are at. Person is traveling to the Count to close out that deal. Strange happenings are happening in the presence of the Count, while similarly strange happenings are going on back home. We have the seduction of one of our leads, and this need to stop this evil force. That core is still there. Now, I remember watching this original Dracula film after reading the book and being a bit disappointed in all the changes that they made at the time, but then thoroughly enjoying the 1992 interpretation, because that film tried to stick a bit closer to the book while also making some changes to kind of flesh things out a bit more, fill out that backstory, and kind of make it ready for the screen. Now, while this interpretation has a similarly dark feel, it doesn't have nearly the same dark look or pace to it as Nosferatu 2024 does. It still has that drawn-out feeling of the book, that slow unfolding of this creepy story, but the music and editing, I felt like it kind of rocketed me through this runtime in a more exciting way. Throw on top of that the visuals, it's truly stunning stuff. Now, comparing how well Nosferatu used that faded color scheme so well, so deeply, and how well it worked in the story that they brought to screen, Coppola's Dracula from '92 used color and contrast in a similar way, where every scene really pops. We will use darkness and the muted tones where we need to, and then we'll throw in some really high color, high contrast, this big explosion, either in aspect to a scene or for the entire scene itself. So much so that I actually purchased the 4K edition of this one, just something that I rarely do unless I really see a visual reason to opt in to replace my Blu-ray with a 4K. Because usually with my setup here at home, upscaling my Blu-ray to 4K is usually fine, but occasionally there are titles like this that I just want to buy a completely new edition of. Anyways, There are also several visual effects shots that really stand out. We have like mist coming in through a window, which was actually featured on Corridor Crew, as well as seen with this train in the background and a journal being written and the Count's eyes kind of in the distance, kind of showing that he's aware that something is circling in towards him. And I guess what I mean is the flashy effects, whether they're digital or practical, which most of them were practical at the time, was never really there to create spectacle. You know, it was there to deepen a shot and call attention to an aspect of what was happening on screen. Along with that, this backstory of Vlad and his demise. So everything from his beginning to the end, to me, felt like it was fleshed out a bit better. It felt more like a tragic romance than something vile and monstrous. Now, he's formidable, scary, sure, but getting to see the projection of his dayside self, the monstrous nighttime version of him, the old man version of him, all these transformations and these flashbacks, it felt like there was a lot more going on in this one. Ultimately, this one, while still very dark and very gothic, it felt like it had a lot more energy throughout it, and the way it was shot, paced, and edited, and just a story in general. Like there's more meat on the bone of this one in a way. Now, I may be one of the few who feel this way about these two films. You know, some really couldn't get over Keanu's accent in Dracula or Dracula's hair in that film. But, you know, I really do prefer Coppola's Dracula over Nosferatu. However, to repeat, you know, I still love Nosferatu. This isn't a this one rocks, this one is trash kind of video. If I had to give numbered ratings for things, it would be really close, such as Dracula being a 10 and Nosferatu being a 9. When it comes to Dracula interpretations, not film in general. And they are different enough from each other to make both of them kind of their own thing, and both of them more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out my first video here of 2025 for Nosferatu versus Dracula, an unpopular opinion. At the time of this video, Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1992, otherwise known as Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, is available on Tubi, as well as paid rental, and Nosferatu 2024 is still in the theaters and is expected to hit streaming sometime in early February, I believe, likely on Peacock. Also, if wanting to revisit the original Nosferatu from 1922, it's on several platforms, including Tubi, Amazon Prime, AMC+, Hoopla, Screenbox. Just check out that Just Watch app to find out if it's on the servers you have. Anyways, that's all I have for this one. Stay tuned for a link to a video at the end for last year's Poor Things vs. Frankenhooker, which will be popping up in just a moment. If you enjoyed this content, please give me a thumbs up. And if you are not already subscribed, consider subscribing. Hit that little bell icon to get notifications when I put up new content, which is usually 1 to 3 times a week. That way you can pop in during that first hour that it posts and give it a watch. It really does help out the algorithm quite a bit. Anyways, that's about all I have for this one. Thanks for coming by, and I'll see you in the next one.